question. I'd like to actually hear some more of the speculation part. You said there'd be some control of auditory memory controlling the descending path down to the brainstem. What kind of mechanism do you think you'll find?
Well, so what I'm wondering about is in a situation where we are in a position to look at kids longitudinally, for example, are we able to see that auditory working memory skills are developing before some of the auditory-based skills like the gains that we might see in reading or in hearing speech and noise? So that's one of the frameworks for looking at this.
I was thinking more like, would you be expecting like auditory memory to be able to provide predictive information, and that's what's controlling stuff down? Is that for you?
Well, you know, it's hard to measure auditory working memory in a really robust, objective fashion, because anytime you have this auditory working memory task, you're requiring a person to do all kinds of things. One of which is just even to understand the task and to repeat back what it is that you're asking them to do. Whereas if you have a biological probe that, in effect, represents this memory ability, then you may be able to test, for example, in a baby. Say you've got a series of sounds, and you're wondering, to what extent the baby may be able to remember this sequence of sounds, and kind of a statistical learning idea. So, this is a way of trying to access some of the processes that are, in fact, cognitive processes that are involved at the same time with the nervous system's ability to make use of sounds, effective use of sounds in context.
If what the brainstem is doing is basically converting an auditory signal into an electrical signal, you might say that it's not really accomplishing very much. I mean, that's basically what a microphone does, isn't it? But
Yeah.
And in fact, you might say, naively, it seems like what the cochlea does is more. The cochlea is doing more because it's actually doing a frequency now.
But the experience dependence is the great big difference here, because most of the information that you get from the cochlea, and really, although we know that eighth nerve responses in animals can be actually affected by whether or not the animal is paying attention to a visual stimulus at the same time that's cueing with the auditory stimulus. For the most part, very peripherally, in fact, you are seeing this transduction process that does not change with experience to the extent, I mean, even out to the hair cells, because of the top-down pathways, we have some of the otoacoustic emissions from the outer hair cells that have the ability to modulate and to change. But within the brainstem, within the inferior colliculus, we know that this is an area that is hugely experience dependent. So that depending on, in humans, on the languages that you speak or the musical experience a person has, but more controlled in an animal where you're really able to, for example, control what kind of frequency tuning an animal might be exposed to in terms of learning, or you might teach them sound localization experiments. Their maps, their auditory maps, really do change in a dynamic, experience-dependent way over multiple time courses, some time courses that are occurring on a real-time scale, and these changes are much, much smaller. Changes that occur over weeks and months of training, and then really sort of lifelong changes, the experience that an animal might have over a much longer period of time. And you see that the way in which the nervous system then responds to a particular signal is not what you predict on day one. So if all the brainstem was doing was spitting out the signal that you have played to it, then it would be the same signal whether or not the animal had this or that learning experience. But the fact is that the experience that the animal has really modulates the response that the nervous system then will impart to the same sound and to particular elements of the sound, which again I think is very important, that it's not just an overall gain effect, but that there are certain elements of sound that seem to have communication relevance or training relevance for an animal who's doing a task. Once the sound becomes relevant, then those aspects of sound are the aspects of sounds that are enhanced. It's a really dynamic system. I think that is fundamental here. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
So we've been accustomed to thinking of working memory as sort of a fixed thing that you have, and you're good at it, you're bad at it. But there have been some recent studies that have shown surprising malleability in training your working memory. You can actually increase the span. So that leads to the intriguing question: if you improve someone's auditory working memory, will it make them be better musicians?
Good question. So one way that we're looking at it is a little bit indirectly. So are you familiar with the Posit Science program? It's a brain fitness program that Mike Merzenich has been behind, and the idea is that, or at least one of the tasks is it's supposed to be cognitively based, and it's supposed to help you increase your auditory working memory, among other things. And so we have a project now that is ongoing in older adults who have been undergoing this auditory training. It's quite a bit of auditory training, where they listen to sounds and engage in these exercises for a period of 6 weeks, 30 or 40 minutes a day, 5 days a week, so it's quite a lot. And we are looking at, does auditory working memory, for example, does that improve? And in fact, I mean, here's another study where if you compare it to people who, we have an active control group, of course, people who are spending the same amount of time watching, they're watching videos, and they're needing to answer questions relating to these stories, educational videos, and then we also have just a passive group. And it turns out that the people who actively engage in doing the exercises of remembering them and anyway, doing this brain science program, they do seem to be showing some gains, and these are not published studies, these are just ongoing studies. It seems promising. And what is interesting is the companion physiologic changes. And so again, what we seem to be seeing is not that the overall timing of all of the responses, for example, is getting better, or that the representation of the harmonics of all sounds are getting better, but actually just of the specific timing elements that are important in, for example, distinguishing one sound from another, like the timing along the formant transition period of a speech syllable. Those are the kinds of things that seem to be strengthened by this training. But again, being able to really look at the extent to which, and we're seeing larger gains actually in the memory than in the speech and noise perception in this group. So, again, sort of feeding into this idea, yeah, as you're saying, auditory working memory seems to be something we can maybe get better at. And I am ultimately really motivated by your last point, which is if we can improve our working memory, could we become better musicians? And could we become better at all kinds of things? For example, when we're reading, you need to be able to remember what the heck you just read in order to know what you're reading now. Working memory is really useful.
And that's a good place to stop and go over and